The member for Narracan.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. It's nice to know everyone's so excited when I get up to speak, and I'm happy to speak on this bill, the legislation amendment bill, Energy Safety Bill 2023. Shut up. And those opposite might be happy to hear that this side of the House is supporting this piece of legislation. This bill is a fairly broad range of reforms, largely aiming making our energy system more focused on delivering outcomes for consumers. And while I don't want to go into all of them, I want to touch on a few key ones. Speaker, over the last decade, we have seen some real change in the available technology when it comes to energy generation. And obviously with the government's push on renewable and the amount of solar panels now being installed and wind farms and everything else, this side of the House has no problem with this bill when we talk about the safety of workers, consumers and the general public. It would be horrifying to think that a blade off a wind farm would fall and hurt someone. So I think any legislation that comes into this House to protect the safety of everyone is good legislation, and the government has done that in this bill. But where I do get a little bit concerned, and it is a concern with the new SEC and the way the government is transitioning and what's going on with the SEC, is in my electorate, for example, I know it's in VCAT at the moment, it's gone through a planning process, but it's at VCAT at the moment. It's a 250-acre solar farm. It's a 250-acre solar farm in the middle of agricultural land. So when we talk about this bill and we talk about this is my concern. The problem we're going to have is because the new energy is going to be so spread out across the state. We're going to have solar farms dotted all over the place. We're going to have wind farms dotted all over the place. How are we actually really going to make sure this is safe? Because if something goes wrong in regional Victoria, it's not a little mistake. It often ends up catastrophic. If we have high north winds, for example, dry grass this high next to bushland, we're going to have another 2020. Could have another 1939 if we're not careful. So I feel as though in the government's rush to transition, we're playing a little bit of catch up with this bill. And I think what the government has to do is really look at the way they're going to deliver the energy and the safety at the same time. Because if they don't get it right, they will put Victorians at risk, at great risk. Now, we also, in this bill, also talks about gas safety, and I'm glad today we have been talking about housing affordability, social housing, and now we're talking gas in this legislation as well. I feel as though the government, stopping gas on the 1st of January 2024, again, they've rushed this through, and I think they've rushed it through mainly because of a deflection on the Commonwealth Games. I mean, the Commonwealth Games has been a disaster, so the government has gone, look, we're going to rush this through to just deflect away from the Com Games. But the problem with the gas and getting rid of gas, it's no different to building. You're starting with renewable now. Great, you're doing wind farms, you're doing solar farms. What you must do is you must get those foundations right first before you take another energy source out of the market. Because at the moment, you haven't got it right. The government is we're not totally renewable. So if you're not totally renewable, why would you take another energy source out of the market? You're not quite there yet, and I think it's premature that the government says we're going to knock off gas in 2024, especially when we've got other states being South Australia and New South Wales has said we're pro-gas. And this side of the chamber is pro-gas because we acknowledge that we need gas as part of our energy source in this state. I know this side and the government will differ on that, but we strongly believe that gas is essential to our energy market. And the problem is when you talk about gas and when you take gas away, the one thing nobody has talked about is the cost. Now, the cost to convert a house from from gas to electric is not cheap. It is not cheap. If you start replacing electric central heating units away from split systems If you start replacing hot plates, when you need electric hot plates, you've got to buy new pots and pans because they're not compatible. When you're talking about water, a Rinnai Infinity is a lot cheaper than a solar-driven hot water unit. You're talking quite a lot of money, and the average Victorian just can't afford that. Now, I've done the math on a conversion on an old house, a 1970s house, straight gable roof. The cheapest way you could do it, it will cost $30,000. $30,000, but then you have to make sure, the other point about this renewable push is you have to make sure you have the supply in the street. So if you've only got a two-phase supply, not a three-phase supply, and all of a sudden houses start converting, is there going to be enough supply in the street? And this is the problem with the new SEC. There's too many unknown variables at this point in time. I mean, when we talk about total renewable, have we factored in no gas? What is the government's plan on gas? Is it only going to be, are we going to stop it altogether? Is there going to be no gas in 10 years' time? Because if there's going to be no gas in 10 years' time, I'm extremely doubtful that the new SEC will be able to cope with the demand and the supply that Victorians will need. I'm extremely doubtful, and the reason I am doubtful is because the government hasn't been very clear on it. They hasn't been very clear on it. So when they've factored in renewable, did they go, OK, we're going to factor in renewable, we need X amount of gigawatts to do this, but if we get rid of gas, what pressure is that going to put on the system? How much extra more will we need? And I don't think that has been factored in. I don't think the government has taken that into account. And I don't think the government has really done proper case studies on whether it will work or not. So I make this suggestion to the government. Rather than paying millions of dollars in consultants, as we know the government does, I make this suggestion. It's a common sense suggestion. I know in this place sometimes common sense runs thin, but I'm very much a pragmatic common sense type of person. Buy a house, an old house somewhere, convert it properly. Electric central heating, electric hot water units, solar panels, batteries. Run that house like you would a normal house. Turn the heater on for 3 hours in the morning in winter, turn the heater on for 3 hours at night, and see if it actually works. Before we go too far down a rabbit hole that we can't get out, do a study, but do a practical study. And you can do them all over the states, different environments all over the states. Do one up north, one down south, east, west. Doesn't matter, but do the study. And then go, OK, based on that, we need this amount of supply. Because if you don't do that study and you get this supply wrong, don't worry about the safety bill, because we're not going to have power anyway. So I urge the government to actually do some proper modelling, not rehash an old badge from 1992 when Joan Kirner sold it off. I'm waiting. But do a proper model, see if it works. I agree with this bill, but I had to take the opportunity to put those points in. And I encourage the government to listen, do the modelling, get it right. Thank you. I commend this bill to the House.